expand our imagination.
Justification for being what you are.
Welcome to Washington Unplugged. I'm John Dickerson. Charlie Rangel couldn't get a deal. The New York congressman faces 13 charges brought yesterday by the House Ethics Committee. His lawyers had been trying to work out something to avoid a trial, but they failed. Negotiations are still ongoing, but so far, no luck. CBS News investigative correspondent Sharyl Attkisson joins me here now with the latest. Sharyl, let's just start with what the 13 charges are. What is Charlie Rangel accused of?
They're basic counts that fall into various categories, including failing to disclose proper financial disclosures of income, stocks, rental properties, and so on. Number two, misusing a set of rent-subsidized apartments in New York for campaign offices. And thirdly, a lot of the charges surround alleged improper fundraising that he did for a pet project in his name called the Rangel Center at City College in New York.
How much in terms of the improper reporting? I mean, it was a couple of nickels and dimes, or did he get into real money here?
The allegations are hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more. When we reported on that part of it last year, we found that he had failed to report, I believe it was 2 checking accounts worth up to $1 million apiece that he simply had not put in on his financial disclosures at all, and an array of stocks and properties over the years that he went back and corrected in retrospect once this investigation started. So this is not pennies, and a lot of Americans will have a hard time understanding how someone can forget about or leave off hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in assets on their financial disclosures. A reminder, he was at the time head of the lead tax committee in the House, and these are infractions for which, if ordinary Americans conducted them, they would be in a lot of trouble potentially. So part of the outrage factor is that he should know better. If he's now saying, I simply made mistakes or I relied on somebody else, which is part of his defense, to fill out these forms, a lot of people aren't buying that. They're saying you should know better.
Right. Those are the kinds of excuses people use when they don't pay their taxes.
Right.
Tell us about using his office and this charge that he used the power of his office to get what he wanted.
Well, I'll start with his defense, because he acknowledges that he may have improperly used public resources, his staff, congressional franking privileges, in other words, not having to pay personally for postage, and so on. He just says he didn't know better. It was sort of a mistake using congressional stationery, congressional letterhead. The problem is he sent out solicitation letters asking for huge amounts of money from corporations that had business before his committee for his Rangel Center, for his personal charity that he had an interest in. And he used congressional stationery. A lot of people think you're kind of strong-arming the donor when you send out as head of the Ways and Means Tax Committee these requests for massive amounts of money. And according to the documents, he would sometimes send a letter afterwards if the donor said no. The letter would say, I'm extremely disappointed that you couldn't help out. And this, too, on congressional stationery. A couple of quick examples. According to the documents released yesterday, he sent letters to 100 foundations, including the ones for J.P. Morgan, Citibank, Merrill Lynch, Goldman Sachs, Bristol Myers. He asked for $30 million, according to these documents, from Verizon and New York Life. $30 million, that's a huge request for these people.
Yeah, wow. So now there wasn't a deal, but there's one still potentially being negotiated in some fashion. But the proceedings are already ongoing. Where are things like?
Well, from what we understand, a deal could still be possible, a settlement, and it's been reported today or said by members of the investigative committee that they were looking at, despite these many pages of documentation they have of infractions, a potential reprimand for him, which is the mildest form of punishment that he could get that would have to go to a full House vote. Now that these details have been released, and you can find the charges and Congressman Rangel's answer on our website, now that all of this is out there and it's so specific, and it really looks bad, even if he does have a defense that there's nothing criminal here, I didn't know better, it still looks so bad. I think it's harder for him to escape with a reprimand settlement than it would have been, you know, prior to these charges being read yesterday.
That's right. A reprimand, just to remind people, was what Congressman Joe Wilson was reprimanded for yelling out "you lie"
Right.
During the president's speech in the well of the House. So it's kind of on that order. And as you point out, that's quite small considering what has just been dumped here yesterday.
Well, just so people know, there's a general opinion I learned when I worked on Capitol Hill that the House and Senate ethics committees are not terribly aggressive in going after their own. Remember, these are members policing one another. It's uncomfortable. One of them said so in the hearing yesterday. Nobody likes policing another member. This investigation was started when Congressman Rangel defiantly asked for the investigation into himself 2 years ago, and they said they really didn't like the task of doing it. So it's pretty hard to get a strong punishment out of these committees when you consider that they're looking at each other. There have only been 6 expulsions from the House and Senate since the Civil War era. It's pretty hard, despite a lot of criminals that have behaved in Congress over the 150 years that we know of after the Civil War. It's pretty hard to get expelled from Congress, and even if the charges are quite serious.
So as a last question, help us out here. If this doesn't go to trial, if Charlie Rangel does try and work out a deal, which his fellow Democrats would really like, they don't want to have this conversation every day from now until the election. How would it have to work in the committee in terms of the votes for him to, if he were to work out a deal, how would the committee handle that?
The way they described it yesterday, the process, there's an even number of Democrats and Republicans on this adjudicatory committee, which is separate from the investigators who looked at the charges. A different group of members will look at what the punishment ought to be, and they kind of start from scratch looking at the evidence. They're evenly split. It would take, from what they described, at least one Republican and all the Democrats to agree to some sort of settlement. What Democrats would really want, though, is for all of the Republicans to be on board in a settlement, because otherwise it would kind of look bad. It would look like a partisan type of thing.
Right, and I think even the chairman of the committee has said, I want all Republicans.
She wants unanimity for this.
Right. Okay. Cheryl, thanks so much.
Welcome.
And now we move on to this week's Flashpoints with National Security Analyst Juan Zarate. And Juan, let's start with where we started the week, but this story won't go away, and it's fascinating, the WikiLeaks. Where are we now on the story? What have we learned now that all of us have gotten a chance to look through these 75,000 reports?
Yeah, certainly the flood of secret documents has fueled opposition for those who were opposing the Afghan war, has given them grist, has given them meat and reports to use to fight President Obama's strategy. For example, you've seen that in Congress with some of the debates happening on funding. But I think what's important, though, you've seen a new debate emerge about the damage assessment. Was this really a wise thing for WikiLeaks to do? Was it something that ultimately is not only going to hurt the troops, but hurt those who have been cooperating with the United States? You saw Secretary of Defense Gates yesterday blasting WikiLeaks, as well as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, saying these people may have blood on their hands, which I think is not only a dramatic statement from the government, but probably a real one, because in those documents you have, now that we've had a chance to go through them, a real sense that sources, methods, even some names of those who've been helping the United States have been revealed, and that's problematic.
Right, because what we're talking about here is, in terms of those sources that have been helping the United States, I mean, they may even not be helping today, but this is not a culture when you're dealing with the Taliban that forgets. I mean, this is basically a list of people they could go after for helping the coalition forces.
That's exactly right. And the Taliban spokesman has already said, if people are U.S. spies, we know how to deal with them. And we know that al-Qaeda, the Taliban, read the New York Times, they read through documents online. Retribution is very quick. They behead people quickly, hang them for display, put night letters out to scare and intimidate folks. So the reality was, and I said this early in the week, people will die as a result of this, either because they're suspected or otherwise. The Taliban will reach out. And this comes at a critical time when we're trying to build trust with Afghan allies, trust with the Pakistanis. And so I think there's a real legitimate debate here as to whether or not what was done was really damaging to our national security. And
just very quickly, because I know we've got other ones, but trust, because if you are in a position to potentially help the Americans, you now have to worry that your name is going to be broadcasted all over the world, potentially.
Absolutely right. There are two elements to trust. One is, can the Americans keep secrets? Can I cooperate with the soldier who's coming to me for help, for information? Secondly, are the Americans going to be gone come September 2011? President Obama has talked about that as the beginning of a withdrawal of troops. What does that mean? For an Afghan villager or a Pakistani villager, that strikes as somewhat of a tenuous relationship.
All right, let's move now to North Africa. What's happening there?
Well, al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, the al-Qaeda branch in North Africa, killed a French hostage. And the French have now declared war on al-Qaeda. Literally, that's what the French Prime Minister has said. President Sarkozy went out and made a public address to the French public after the death of the hostage. The French are taking this very seriously. They helped the Mauritanians raid an al-Qaeda site in Mali. They have vowed to help the countries in the region, Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Algeria, to fight against al-Qaeda. And you've seen Ayman al-Zawahiri, who once said that he wanted this branch of al-Qaeda to be the bone in the throat of the French, come out and start to criticize the French for things like the banning of the veil, etc. So you have a real pitched battle now between the French and the al-Qaeda branch in North Africa, which is not going to be helpful to the al-Qaeda folks.
And potentially helpful to the U.S. in terms of having the French as a more cooperative ally in the global war against terror, or whatever the administration's calling it these days. Absolutely
right. I think the French have always been good partners, have always been helpful, but to have the French being out front aggressively, rhetorically, is actually quite helpful, and it gives other countries like the Spanish some cover to perhaps do more with their North African counterparts.
Okay, our third topic, Venezuela and Colombia.
The world doesn't get any simpler. Moving to the Western Hemisphere, tensions increasing between Venezuela and Colombia. Colombia again accusing Venezuela of supporting, harboring, helping the FARC guerrillas, the terrorist group that Colombia has been fighting for 20 plus years. Also harboring the Basque terrorist group, ETA. This is something the Spanish have alleged as well. And so this has raised tension. The Venezuelans have cut relations now with Colombia. Hugo Chavez has said that if the U.S. invades Venezuela, because they view the United States being behind this, that Venezuela will stop oil shipments. And so all of this has created a very tense atmosphere at a time when there's a transition of power coming in Colombia.
Okay, our last topic, digital diplomacy. What does that mean?
Well, Secretary Clinton a few months ago gave an important internet speech talking about internet freedom being important to our values, to U.S. foreign policy. But also she talked about the use of the internet and social media to actually engage on a people-to-people basis and with governments. And so you've seen diplomatic trips with folks like Ashton Kutcher to Russia, a recent diplomatic diplomacy trip to Syria, which proved somewhat controversial. But an attempt by the State Department and some young, really smart guys like Alec Ross and Jared Cohen to use social media to advance U.S. interests.
How's it working? I mean, are they connecting or are they just kind of emitting?
Well, it's more than messaging. What they're trying to do is use these tools as tools of diplomacy. Here's some examples. With the Haitian earthquake problems, they used social media and digital media to raise over $3 million very quickly. In Afghanistan, they've moved to mobile banking to avoid some of the corruption issues, and so money is transferred quickly via mobile technology. In Mexico, they're exploring whether or not they can have tip lines that can be anonymous, so people can tip on the drug cartels in ways that might make it more efficient for the government. And so they're trying to find active ways. One criticism is it's a smattering, and it's not big enough. And one criticism I would have is we haven't made a decision as to whether or not we're going to fuel the digital dissent that we see in places like Iran. That decision hasn't been fully made by this administration, and I think it's the one thing that's left to be answered by Secretary Clinton.
Okay, good. Well, it'll be a topic for a future Flashpoint. Thanks, Juan.
Thanks, John.
And finally, Chelsea Clinton is getting married. We know the location, Rhinebeck, New York, and we know the groom, Mark Mesvinsky. But all the other details are being guarded like the nuclear codes. Tomorrow on the Early Show, they'll be covering the proceedings, and anchor Erica Hill is here to fill us in on the pageantry. Welcome, Erica. Okay, so what do we know? Do we know anything more than those two facts?
We know that there are a lot of people in Rhinebeck, New York, who are expecting a big wedding. It is reportedly taking place at Astor Courts. You know, this is a sprawling estate, and there's been so much activity there. CBS obtained pictures of tents being put up. There's also been a temporary no-fly zone put in effect for, I believe it's 1.5 nautical miles within the area, which covers part of the Hudson too, because it's a beautiful venue that looks out over the Hudson. So, in terms of security, there is a lot. It's not just the roads in town leading there, but it's the airspace too to keep people and paparazzi out. And that no-fly zone is 2,000 feet. And then also when you've got the river as well, all these different points of entry. So we know there's been a lot of activity there. There have been some people that said where they live in Rhinebeck, they've been told the roads are going to be closed down there for a certain point on Saturday, so it's going to make it a little tough for them. But everyone is really, really quiet. They have done a great job with whatever the confidentiality agreement is that they had people sign. It must be ironclad because no one's talking.
And we have, obviously, a former president and we have a Secretary of State. what other kinds of stars or dignitaries or names might be appearing, or is that also a tight kept secret?
Little tidbits are trickling out. We know that President Obama said yesterday he will not be attending. So we have a no there. There were some rumors of Oprah that's kind of gone back and forth. Barbra Streisand, though, reportedly will be attending. That's the latest word. Ted Danson and Mary Steenburgen are very good friends, so I think it's expected. A lot of people expect for them to be there. Past dignitaries, obviously, or past staffers. There's been some talk that Lisa Caputo, who of course worked for the Clintons, that she may be there. So there are names being bantered about. It's very difficult to nail anybody down. Even people who know people who are going seem to be really respecting the wishes of the Clintons, and specifically Chelsea, to keep it quiet.
Well, and so in all of this secrecy, though, what do you have planned for the coverage of it?
We are just going to blow it all wide open. We wish, right? We have some great stuff coming up tomorrow on the show. We want to give you a little feel for the town of Rhinebeck, give you an idea of why Chelsea and Mark chose this location, because it's a beautiful area. It's actually going to be my first time up there as well, and I've heard nothing but great things about the town and about the people. We're going to sit down with the editor of the Hudson Valley News. He, of course, is the guy who broke this story, who said, look, I know they're getting married here. I know it's July 31st. We'll talk to him. Hopefully he's got a few more tidbits for us in the morning. We're also going to talk about the security, which you and I just talked about a little bit. But how do you secure an event like this when you have a current Secretary of State, a former president, and likely a few other very high-profile people? So we'll look at that. Also, what do you get for the bride and groom who likely have everything?
That's right, and I wonder what the parents will get them. But you also mentioned you'll have Doris Kearns Goodwin, the historian, on to talk about these
which
things.
We're really looking forward to. So we're going to talk to her a little bit about weddings of first daughters past, because they've been done in a number of different ways. You look at Jenna Bush just a year or two ago when she got married. She was fairly private, maybe not as private as Chelsea Clinton, but she put out a couple of pictures, did a little bit of beforehand, and it seemed like it was just enough of a taste to satisfy people's curiosity, and they kind of left her alone. So interesting to see how she's handling things, and then how things are working right now with Chelsea Clinton, who's trying to keep it all so close to the vest. And it's working and it's not working.
Well, and people may think this is a part of the modern age, this obsession over the children of presidents and former presidents. But Doris Kearns Goodwin probably can talk about the Lyndon Johnson daughter when she was married. It was a full day coverage on the news when there weren't, so many networks, and it was all day long they covered the thing.
Absolutely. So we will talk a little bit about that. And for a lot of people here in the U.S., I mean, this really is equivalent to a royal wedding in other countries, because whether or not first children would like their lives to be private, to a lot of people, they are a very public figure, and they figure out as well, you're the daughter of my president, my former president, so I want to know what you're doing. There's really a very keen interest in all first children and in the first families. So we will look back at a few of those.
That's great. Thanks so much, Erica. We'll look forward to it tomorrow. Thanks all of you for watching Washington Unplugged. Be sure to catch Face the Nation this Sunday. Harry Smith will be joined by Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, and Senator John Kyle of Arizona. I'm John Dickerson. We'll be back here on Monday. Have a great weekend.